Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. You know how sometimes you meet someone and there's something about them that you just like? You want to get to know them better, or maybe hang out, or maybe even become fast friends. In that case, one might say you like the cut of their jib. So special thanks to listener John from Kansas who suggested this phrase. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the cut of one's jib means, quote, one's personal appearance, countenance, or look. Originally a sailor's figure of speech, suggested by the prominence and characteristic form of the jib of a ship, end quote.
Okay, I've read a lot of things about ships. Like, I read all of that book, Moby Dick. You learned a lot about ships.
Hey, no offense, but that's not a book about ships. That's a book about revenge and...
There's a little bit about revenge and
and
a
lot about a ship.
And a lot about ships.
Yeah.
But I just don't recall what a jib is.
Okay, well, that's all right. We're going to talk about that. Well,
okay.
But basically, now, if you say, I like the cut of your jib, or I don't like the cut of your jib, you're saying, I like your look, or I like your vibe, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically what we're saying. I like what you got going on there, you know. And it
not like appearance, right?
No, it could be.
Okay,
You could be talking about someone's specific appearance, but you could also be just be talking about their whole vibe, you know. So it could go in a couple of different ways. And so we're going to see some of the positive uses of it, and we'll see it in the negative, as in I don't like the cut of his jib. And if you've ever spent time looking into turns of phrase, you will groan anytime you hear someone casually mention nautical origins, because there are so many words that people are like, well, it originated with ships or originated with pirates or whatever. And of course,
like it's old sailor talk.
Yeah, that is not it is not true as often as it is claimed, but some phrases do have nautical origins, and it's just like this one here does. So we're going to start by finding out what a jib is. Back to the Oxford English Dictionary, quote, a triangular staysail stretching from the outer end of the jib boom to the fore topmast head in large ships, and from the bowsprit to the masthead in smaller craft, end quote. Okay. All right, well, now I know exactly what a jib is.
Yeah.
That was sarcasm.
Well, I mean, like, generally diagrams help with
yes.
with ships.
So, yeah, I have no idea what the Oxford English Dictionary was trying to say there. That was clearly written for sailors. But basically, the jib is a triangular-like sail that's in front of the forward mast, which is that forward big pole on a ship or a boat. So its purpose is to reduce turbulence on that main sail. If I were to put it in like super layman's terms, because that's all I understand, and having read a bunch about jibs and the variety of jibs you could have, there are like, you know, some places have like 2 or 3 of them, and there are like 19 or 20 different types of jibs that get mentioned. And I'm just like, wow, that is, that's a lot. And there seems to be some historical disagreement regarding when jibs were used on larger craft, leaving to note that jibs were definitely used by smaller craft by the end of the 1500s, and the Oxford English Dictionary said 1688, jibs were part of the ordinary stores at Woolwich and must therefore have been used in large ships before that date. So that means that while there's not really a disagreement on what a jib is or how they were used, there does seem to be a disagreement on when jibs started showing up in ships and the different kinds of ships they might have been showing up in. But I got to be honest with you, that is a kind of debate for a different kind of nerd. And my kind of nerdery is in word nerdery, and that one is outside of my proverbial wheelhouse.
Fair. I'm finding this fact because as you started describing it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember like that sail, you know,
the one in front.
The one in front there. It's like if you're thinking of that first big pole mast, that it's the one that's in front of that goes forward from
before
it.
That.
Yeah. And I always.
That's it. That's the one. That triangle that goes forward from it. Yes, that's the one. That's the jib.
And
or one of many jibs potentially.
In my brain, I somehow always thought of it as kind of like the opposite of a rudder, but for the air instead of in the water. And I don't know why, but that's what my brain tells me. If that's helpful to anyone.
Okay. I'm glad we had that talk. No more jibs. That's too much jibs. All right, let's talk about cutting jibs or such. All right, so the first time I could find this phrase was in a song that is at least as old as 1796.
Wow, okay.
Because it was performed in the show In England's Glory at Sadler's Wells. The song was sung by Mr. Dighton in the role of Jack Marlinspike. And the first thing you're going to hear in the verse that I'm going to read is a slang term, tar. And according to the Maritime History Archive at Memorial University of Newfoundland, Jack Tar is an English term that refers to seafarers of the Merchant Marine and Royal Navy, particularly when the British Empire was at its largest. Jack was likely used because it's a common name, and we see it in Francis Gross's work of the vulgar tongues in the late 1700s and early 1800s, where Jack this, Jack that, Jack something else. And so it's just a slang term that's used to just mean a common name, right? Okay. And tar seems to refer to the use of tar on ships to waterproof different things like clothing, canvas, ropes, and cables. We'll look a little more into Jack Tar in our behind the scenes video, which is available every Friday on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. But here is a line from that show and that song, specifically in that show. Quote,
I thought you were going to sing to us. I got really excited for a second. But you're going to read it.
No, I'm going to read it because the unfortunately there was no sheet music for me to be able to plunk out on the piano and figure out what that song was.
Okay, so that means if one of you can find the sheet music, Dan will sing it to us.
That does not mean that. No, it does absolutely not mean that, although it probably is in the public domain. All right, so here's a line from that song. Quote, "When a tar comes ashore, splice my cable. These hussies, I'm telling no fib. The state of his pocket are able to tell by the cut of his jib. If they find that the shiners are plenty, they can coax the poor lad for his pelf. As they look, should his pockets prove empty, as sour as the devil himself." End quote.
Man, there's some clever stuff going on there.
I know, right?
It's impressive. Yeah. I like it. Okay.
So apparently the lady folk can tell when a man comes ashore by the cut of his jib that whether or not he has money or doesn't have money. And if he has money, they will coax it out of him. But they use the word pelf here, which I think is very interesting because pelf refers to money that is usually gained through dishonest or disreputable means. Right. So in this case, they are not necessarily saying that the lady folk who are doing this are necessarily any more wrong for taking the money from the men who probably got it through some ill-gotten gains in the first place. Right. But but they will also, if he looks like he does not have any money, then they will look as sour as the devil himself. It's a really fun song. But so we'll look more into like the tar piece, the Jack Tar piece, in the behind the scenes. But it'll come back up a couple more times here in the show. All right, the next one is from a footnote in the 1822 work, The American Mariner by John Davis. I'll read the part in the poem first and then his footnote second. And our phrase shows up actually in the footnote. Here's the first part of the poem. Quote, "And Neptune, sitting in a gay plight above, tilts like a bridegroom dancing to his love. 'Tis he, I know him by his jib. He comes, I trust, without his peerless rib." End quote. So the jib has a little asterisk by it. Actually, rib also had a little mark by it. And when they said without his peerless rib, there was a footnote there that they were referring to Neptune's wife as the peerless rib.
Right.
Know him by his jib had the asterisk, and this footnote is attached to the word jib. Quote, "A legitimate sailor always describes the recognition of an old acquaintance metaphorically. He knows him again by the cut of his jib or the peak of his mizzen." End quote.
But metaphorically, what does that mean is what I'm wondering.
I know him by the peak of his mizzen. Probably his butt. I don't know.
I mean.
Or just like being able to see him from behind,
Yeah, maybe.
Could be that. Although, we'll see here in a few that cut of his jib could be used like that too. So, and in fact, we'll see that here in this very next one, which is from the 1864 work Slang Dictionary, also known as The Vulgar Words, Street Phrases, and Fast Expressions of High and Low Society. and it was compiled by John Camden Houghton. Quote, jib, the face or a person's expression. The cut of his jib, i.e. his particular appearance. The sail of a ship, which in position and shape corresponds to the nose on a person's face. Sea, as in the ocean sea. A vessel is known by the cut of the jib sail, hence the popular phrase to know a man by the cut of his jib. End quote.
Okay.
Yeah, so we see here where it could be referring to like their front or whatever with like the nose, and we also see it where it could be talking about knowing a ship by the cut of its jib sail, and how it's flying. And I think it's becoming more and more clear that the cut of his jib comes from being able to recognize a ship by what kind of a jib or how many jibs it's using. And if we're referring to people metaphorically anyway, as we've seen sailors were wont to do, then it makes sense that you could recognize a person by the proverbial cut of their jib, which could refer to nose, but it could refer to just their general being as well. It could be something you don't even recognize why that person could stand out, but that person is standing out for something ineffable or some intangible quality.
Right.
This next one is from a British captain who mistook another captain's lazy style of speaking for incompetence. It was reprinted in the Cooperstown Courier out of North Dakota on January 25th, 1884, and that's what I'm going to read from. But it notes that it was originally published earlier in that year in the Philadelphia Times. The article starts out, quote, I got badly left in forming a hasty opinion of the la-dee-da captain of an English ironclad, said Captain Ormiston of the British steamer Effective, end quote. So then he goes on to tell the story about how a crewman had fallen overboard and the entire crew sprung into action with the captain himself diving into the water to begin the rescue. And so he was surprised by the efficiency of the rescue and the bravery of the captain. So he ends the tale with, quote, he was a peer of the realm, and a better officer does not walk the deck of any English ship to date. No, gentlemen, you can't always tell the man by the cut of his jib, end quote. I also think it's really interesting to see the kind of allusion to like can't judge a book by its cover in that same musing. You can't judge a man. You can't always tell a man by the cut of his jib.
Yeah, I like that.
I think that's interesting. All right, here we have one from the Bruce Herald out of Tokimariro, New Zealand. That town is now known as Milton, and it is dated November 4th, 1892. It is from an article called The Individuality of Ships. Quote, to a sailor, every vessel is an individual. No two vessels, not even of the same class, are alike to him. The man who keeps a lookout can recognize over 100 vessels that belong to that port the minute he sees them 20 miles away through his telescope. You see the back of a friend and know him by the cut of his jib, he says. This is almost literally true in the case of vessels, end quote. So that article, which was really interesting, talked about how the people at the lookouts at that time frame who were using their telescopes could see which ship might be pulling back into port based on, among other things, the cut of the jib sail, but on a few other things as well. And the article even mentioned that sometimes the sailor couldn't even say why they necessarily know that it's that ship. They just recognize the outline or whatever as like that's definitely this vessel or that's definitely this vessel.
Okay.
So I think that's really interesting, to see that you can see the back of a friend and know him by the cut of his jib, and then it's like backronymed almost into this one. It's almost literally true in the case of vessels. It's like, yeah, they expect cut of the jib more than you would know what a jib actually is. Yeah, in 1892 at least, which makes sense. The phrase has been around for over 100 years at that point, or right around 100 years at least.
Right, and if people are using it regularly, that's just fascinating. I love that.
Yeah, I really liked that one. I like being able to see when it's in newspapers that are outside of England or America, the United States of America. I love seeing this because there's a lot of English-speaking countries out there besides just those two, you know. So or countries where we see English spoken even if it's not the native language, like in this next case. Here's one from the Mexican Herald out of Mexico City, Mexico. I feel like I've said Mexico too many times here now. The newspaper touts itself as the largest newspaper in Mexico and is read by everyone who reads English in Mexico. Woof. Okay, here we go. This is a short blurb that the editors put in based on the Telegram Newswire service. In this case, the Associated Press, and it was wired over from San Antonio. And it is dated June 20th, 1905. Quote, President Roosevelt has ordered that sailors on the warships of the Republic shall be allowed to have the ship's tailor fit their clothes. Jack Tar has usually been most indifferent to the cut of his jib, end quote. So we see Jack Tar come around again here, talking about the cut of his jib, in this case, his clothing, or just general, like what he looks like even. So it was interesting that President Roosevelt, in this case Theodore Roosevelt, had ordered that. And I had forgotten, I grew up in Texas, so I learned a lot of Mexican history as part of Texas history. But I had forgotten that for a long time, those in Mexico referred to America as the Republic. Like they didn't call it the United States of America or America as much as they just referred to it as the Republic, And so then I was like, oh man, that kind of came back to me from 7th grade Texas history.
Yeah, it's like a weird thing, isn't it, to think about? Yeah.
Yeah, and very interesting. But yeah, it is also interesting to see Jack Tar make its appearance again.
Yeah.
All right, this one is an example out of Kingston, Jamaica, with the author writing about the different kinds of men they met on a ship in port. This was published in the Daily Gleaner on March 31st, 1924. Quote, Then there's my friend with the North of Ireland cut to his jib and the small and twinkling eye, end quote.
I gotta say, this is a thing that I've read like a lot in a lot of different novels and things, like stories, is about the twinkling eye thing is like oftentimes related to the Irish, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Well, in any case, in this case, the twinkling eye is also being used almost euphemistically, to hint at something else. Much
like something behind it, that cut of the jib and the
so
twinkling eyes.
Cut of his jib or cut to his jib, that kind of thing. It's like, there's something there, but sometimes it could refer to, the shape of their nose or their face. It could refer to their clothing, or it could refer to their just general being, their vibe.
Yeah.
You're not like, it's not always just one thing that makes it up. Sometimes it is the clothes, or the unique features of their, body or something. But sometimes it's, you're not sure.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, one more. This is from the Boston Globe out of Massachusetts, dated September 1st, 1939. It features an old sailor smoking a simple pipe with the caption, "The word jib was applied to a man's nose." Here's the opening paragraph from the article. Quote, Sailormen of an earlier generation drew liberally on their vocation for expressions that gave color to their speech. Thus, in expressing disapproval of an individual, physically or morally, your old New England captain might say, "I don't like the cut of his jib." Such a verdict in a vessel's crew or shoreside community was equivalent to social excommunication. End quote.
Okay.
I like that, where they're trying to apply it specifically to applied to the man's nose, and the old sailor that's smoking a simple pipe in this image definitely has a very prominent nose. So,
I see. Yeah.
But as we've seen many of evidence, it was not only applied to people's physical features.
Right.
It could be applied in any other way, and they even note that here with expressing disapproval on individual physically or morally, right? So it's not, they're even noting it's not just the nose.
Yeah. Well, and I like that it says, that somebody having that verdict upon them would have them excommunicated.
Social
socially.
excommunication. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, it is time to move to our more modern uses. But first, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Well, it is clear, looking into the modern uses, that Cut of the Jib is definitely not used as frequently as it once was. And in fact, Google Books Ngram certainly seems to bear this out, with a steady decline since the mid-1800s until about the 1980s, and then only a minimal increase from 1980 to present. Usually in this segment, our job is to cull down the number of results we get. Like, we've got hundreds to choose from, and we've got to pull it down to six or seven that kind of showcase the different ways that it's being used today. But this one here, I was reaching through the 10th page of search engines, following leads through like 7 degrees of Facebook pages, and I was scrounging around through artwork sites. And the point I'm making is that Cut of the Jib just isn't as popular as many of the phrases we do on the show, at least not in online culture.
Okay.
So we'll start off with a few bands that I found that are using some play on the name. First, Cut of the Jib, who has a 2006 album, Speakeasy, that is for sale on Amazon. It is a compact disc, but you can still go to Amazon and get it. I will link to it if you'd like. There's also Cut of Your Jib, doing alt rock, and it seemed that they did their last work in 2011. I will link to their Bandcamp if you want to check them out. And then third, also Cut of Your Jib, and they made a music video cover of Fleetwood Mac's Dreams in 2019. They uploaded it to their YouTube page, and we'll link to that, but it doesn't seem like they did anything after that. Okay. So it's like it had really good idea, and then they created a thing like all of these folks did. They created a thing or two or three, and then that was it. I can't find anything else about them. So, but I'll link to that too. It's a pretty good cover, you know. The music is very good. So, that's just a couple of different bands that I found who use the name or some variant on Cut of Your Jib, Cut of Their Jib, Cut of Your Jib, His Jib, whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting because it does seem like it would make a good, like it's a good band name thing, you know? Like,
right.
So, okay.
Yeah. So the next one I'll talk about is a book. The Cut of Her Jib is a retelling of historical events by Clara Nickerson Bowden, the aging granddaughter of the couple in the story. It is billed as fiction, but it is based on the true story of her grandparents as told to her by her grandmother when her grandmother was aging. And so here's the synopsis from the publisher, or at least part of it. The synopsis is actually like half of the book long, I think. No, but it was like 2 full pages long. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to do the part that matters here, which, quote, imagine your husband being gone for 2 or 3 years, out of touch, but for the very occasional letter. That was what young Faith faced as she and Seth Nickerson met and fell in love. This historical novel follows the awakening and growing love between a young landlubber school teacher and a dashing sea captain. It is a colorful and inviting story of the exciting, dangerous, and tedious life at sea and the lonely but amiable life on land during the 1840s and 1850s. End quote. I also thought it was really cool that Clara Nickerson Bowden, the author of this, wrote this story in 2011 and used the proceeds that she got from this to, 10 years later, in her 70s, actually get on a ship and take a trip on a ship to see what all of this was about that her grandmother was telling her. So she ended up taking a ship to Hawaii, which was one of the ports that her grandfather used to make land in a lot and were, you know, featured in the story. So she really got to experience that at the age of like 72.
Cool. How awesome is that?
Yeah, that was really neat. All right, this is one where I played so many 7 degrees of Facebook to try and track down because I ran into this song, but I couldn't find I was trying to like, surely this band has a page somewhere, and I finally found a SoundCloud page with their work on it. But this song is called Cut of Your Jib, and it was released in 2011, and it is by the band Streaming Lights. As you can tell, searching the phrase Streaming Lights was not super helpful because every search engine site wanted to sell me something. Yeah, so this song, Cut of Your Jib, was originally released in 2011 and was re-released in 2014 on their album Kick. It's an indie rock song, and here are the lyrics, in which each line is actually repeated 3 times. I'm only going to say it once. Quote, I like the cut of your jib. You're more concerned where I live. You stink of effort to me. How does that make you feel? 'Cause I don't care what you're paid. What's wrong with my DNA? End quote. It's really interesting. The song seems to showcase someone who is not concerned about status or trying too hard, or what money you make or what kind of house you live in, with someone that they maybe seem to have desire some affection from. I don't know if that's as a sexual affection, or if that's a affirmation as a parent or as a friend or a mentor. I don't know, but it seems to showcase this dichotomy of someone who doesn't care about those things versus this other person who does seem to care about the status and the hustle and working hard at things to get what they want out of life. So, even the question of what's wrong with my DNA, which if this was sexual, that could be taken in a different way, but I'm not sure it is. And so I also see it in that what's wrong with me that I don't see, that I don't value the same things you value.
Right.
I Like the Cut of Your Jib is a 2019 song by David M. Bax off the album Upbeat Sea Shanties and Pirate Songs.
Oh, fitting. Okay.
Yes. It's instrumental, but it fits the description of an upbeat nautical song, and we'll link to it on the Patreon so you can go listen to it. There's no words, but...
Okay.
Here's another one. This one is a true artwork. This is an acrylic painting by Preston M. Smith, and it's titled, I Like the Cut of Your Jib. Here is the artist's description. Quote, this is a unique, modern, abstract acrylic diptych painting that will make a statement in your home or office. These pieces have a vibrant, modern design aesthetic. They are fierce and full of energy, rebellious attraction, and movement. The colors streak and overlap, while also being contrasted by bold and subtle color shifts. The accents of fuchsia, purple, yellow, orange, hot pink, blue, black, white, and hints of green is both modern and striking. These paintings are energetic and embody a mysterious connection to each other. It's truly an abstract, modern, diptych painting that no other that will enhance your space. End quote. I don't know what diptych means, Diptych, but I can tell you this. I don't see some of those colors that the artist mentions because I have a color vision deficiency, and this feels very abstract to me. And so I'm not sure I get the appeal of this. But as our resident, I can see every color that exists, and art critic, Shauna, what's your take on this particular artwork?
Okay, so diptych sounds like it's confusing, but it's pretty simple. It just means 2 panels of artwork that relate, like that coordinate or will relate to one another.
Oh, sure, yeah,
so
and it is 2 different pieces. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
They could just
that
say
are side
it's
to side.
a pair of paintings, but
okay, yeah, but why would they? Why use that? Why say this is a pair of paintings that go together when you could say diptych?
Yeah. Essentially, they're intended to go together in one way or another. These are really interesting to me. They do have a lot of color, and the colors are bold. They blur, but they don't blend a lot, and so
wow, I don't know what that means. Blur but don't blend.
Yeah, the colors like spread into each other's spaces without truly blending together to like wash
they're not
each other out. They're not blending from one color to the next to the next.
And when 2 colors blend, it could make a new color.
Yes.
Because I remember the primary will in school.
Yeah.
Which gave me some struggles, but it's fine.
So I think it's really cool. One has more horizontal aspects and the other has more vertical, but both incorporate horizontal and vertical lines in the design. And it's got a very modern grunge feel, but not totally grunge, if that makes any sense. You
Maybe
could
that's
hang
the
this,
rebellious attraction that the
yes,
author mentions, or
you
the
could
artist.
absolutely have this in an office without it looking like it's, you know, grunge work, but it does have
Well,
a really cool
at over
feel.
$3,000 for this Diptych, I don't think I would be able to afford that.
Fair enough.
I would love to be able to afford to spend $3,000 on artwork because I think it's pretty, but
Yeah, fair.
yeah, that's not my life.
I think this is an excellent example of abstract work that can look really cool in a space if you
Yeah.
get the right space and the right funds.
All right. Well, I don't know why, but I absolutely love this phrase. And I have always used it to mean I like your vibe rather than I like your face or I like your clothes. It's always been like vibe. I was looking it up to see if Riz applies here, and apparently in some cases you could say that man's got Riz, meaning I like the cut of his jib,
Yeah.
but not necessarily. Like they're not. It's not a one for one cross, but there is a cross here with that kind of a language, and that's what do they call it? Very online language, you know. But and I think I'm gonna start trying to use it more because I mean it deserves a comeback, I think. So.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to start saying I like to cut of your jib far more often. And listeners, I encourage you to do the same. Let's see if we can bring this one back because it is a harmless background. If you'll be like, I like the cut of her jib, you know, it feels kind of a bit antiquated, but it also feels like it's got a place, you know, in today's society. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not plugged into society, but what if we try and bring this back? Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, that's about all we have time for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, do you sing in the shower? Most of our patrons admit to being shower singing champions, with only a little less than 40% saying they don't sing in the shower.
I have to say it's odd for me because I will break out into song all the time, except in the shower. And I think it's because my singing is almost always triggered by someone saying something that reminds me of lyrics or saying something in such a cadence that puts me into a song, you know, and then I'll start singing the song. And there's not a lot that triggers that in the shower, I suppose.
Mary says, quote, the shower is a great place to warm up your voice, so I've been known to sing a lot in there. I'm like Dan. Words or phrases can set me off about any time. Pitches and rhythms do it too, like the vacuum cleaner, a blow dryer, windshield wipers, and printers, end quote.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, singing happens mostly in the car or when I get wrapped up in the song that's playing in my head. And sometimes I don't notice that I've started singing out loud for a minute. I've had people stop by my office at times and they're like, oh, I thought I heard something. Like, oh, it's just me. I was listening to the radio. I turned it off just now and now I don't know. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid, and patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.